Thank you so much for that, Samir. Samir Chakar from NetScout there. And with that, we come to the last session for the day. And it's honestly been a packed day. And given the expanding threat surface area, Zero Trust has been a trusted resort for businesses across the world. And we'll now listen to Peter Bjork, the principal architect for Zero Trust for the EUC Office of the CTO at VMware, talking to us about Zero Trust and the importance of continuous reinforcement. Let's listen in.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure being here presenting to you. First of all, I will discuss some future statements or what we are thinking about at the company that I work at VMware. So just be aware that there might be things discussed throughout this slide deck that is not yet available on the market. But I think it's important to start with the backdrop of Zero Trust and some of the things that has been against Zero Trust. If you remember back in the early days of cloud, it was sort of frowned upon. No one really understood what it was. It was like, well, it's just someone else's computer. But now we know that cloud stands for certain principles. We have agility, rapid scale up, scale down, subscription, consumption model, and so forth. So now I think we all can agree on the value that cloud presents to us. Zero Trust has been struggling with much the same hurdles in the beginning. I would say yesterday, Zero Trust was very much undefined, and therefore it was very hard for people to fully understand what it meant and what to do with it. But I would say today, we actually do have a proper Zero Trust architecture defined. What is painfully obvious, though, with this architecture is today, no one can actually achieve it 100%. And that is where it starts to become a little hard to grasp and understand potentially. But hopefully this presentation will explain what I mean with that. But still, we do have a defined architecture that we can lean against. And the defined architectures has been developed and published by a numerous of different organizations, where NIST might be the one in the forefront. At least when I'm concerned, NIST is obviously the organization that many government agencies or all agencies in US are looking at. But there are many. They are very similar, though. And then we got some petrol thrown on the fire, so to speak, with the mandate from the American president or White House that all the government agencies now need to adopt a better security architecture. And it actually named Zero Trust as being that architecture, which obviously boosted the interest for Zero Trust quite significantly. So, what is Zero Trust? And in order to discuss that or describe it, we need to take a little quick history lesson. So historically, we've had this notion of a perimeter-based architecture when it comes to security, where we have this trusted zone versus the untrusted zone. And in all honesty, this security architecture, there is nothing fault with it. It's an excellent, clean, easy to understand architecture. The problem started when we started to introduce even more segments or variations. And I don't think there is anyone out there who doesn't have at least one DMZ. Most of us have several different DMZs, which the architecture start to crack down a little bit. And to make it worse, we need to support external users. So now we are punching a hole through all our segments and through all perimeter protection, just in order for users to stay productive. And we all know that we are adapting cloud more and more and SaaS applications. So now we have application and its data outside of our control. So by looking at this, we understand that the old model, the promise of the old model is broken. We do not have well-defined parameters anymore. And it has been shown over and over again that if you get attacked and they get a footprint in your environment, it's very easy for them to move laterally because you have a lot of neighboring systems with very little controls between them. So you may have a very strong perimeter protection, but once inside, it's pretty much open for further attacks. So this needs to change. So the old model is painfully broken. We know remote workforce is here to stay, and cloud certainly as well. So the new model, the zero trust model that we will focus on throughout this session, is all based on minimizing the implicit trust zone. So ideally, you need to create a microperimeter around each individual application and its data. And then everything else is put as untrusted or outside of this perimeter. This means that all users, it doesn't matter the location, if they are connected to an office location, for example, there should be no difference at all for the validation of that user if they are inside your office building versus outside or working from a home office, for example. But in order to achieve this, we also need something that protects this microperimeter, and that needs to expand across all our applications and data. So we need to build these microperimeters around all our own applications that we manage, but also the ones that we have subscribed to, let's say the SaaS applications of the world. And for the argument or for the sake of the discussion, let's call this component an intelligent access decision component. And now all traffic needs to flow through this component, not only user access, but also service-to-service communication. There should be no shortcuts between different applications. If two applications need to communicate with each other, they need to pass through our intelligent access decision component. But zero trust doesn't promise that you will never ever be attacked. But the beauty of this model is if you get attacked, the blast area is much smaller. We can contain the attack because it's only successful within that microperimeter. And since there are no shortcuts, there is no way that the attacker easily can move laterally throughout your systems. If they are targeting another application or system within your environment, they need to pass through and go out on the untrusted and then try to force their way back in through this intelligent access decision component. So this is basically the foundation of zero trust, that everything needs to be equally strong validated. That is the main promise of zero trust, as well as we should bring down the implicit trust areas to the absolute smallest possible. But regarding this intelligent access decision component, how can it make its decisions? What is approved and allowed? Well, it requires data, and data that we sometimes today do not have. So I will talk a little bit about collecting the data and then what is this intelligent access decision component. But when you look at zero trust and most of the definitions of zero trust, it says that you should never trust by default. You always verify and do it continuously. And we need much more dynamic data. Today, or in the old model, we are very much based on static roles and static methods of authentication and so forth. In the new world of zero trust, we need to add dynamic data, and we need to do it in a continuous fashion. It's no good that we validated something 8 hours ago. We need to validate it every second, if at all possible. We should implement principle of least privilege, obviously, and assume breach. In other words, all communication needs to be validated. But Zero Trust are, from the beginning, designed for a remote workforce, because it doesn't matter where you're located. We will validate you equally. So regarding this data that we need to collect in order for our intelligent access decision component to make a good decision about access and authorization, I divide data into 5 main pillars, so areas of context, where we have the user identity. And here's a list of some of the attributes of the user, far from the complete list, but just to give you an idea that, for example, we need to have, in order to be certain that the user is who the user claims to be, you must have a strong user validation. In other words, username and password is history. We can no longer use username and password because it has been proven over and over again that it's too easy to be subject to phishing attacks. Users are reusing passwords or variations of them, and you can crack password storage or vaults to retrieve passwords from users. So that is the very first step we need to do, get rid of passwords. And then we need to collect context or data around the device the user currently is in front of, the device requesting access to an application. We need to have much more insight into the network itself. Obviously, we need to create these micro-segmentations, but also the access itself, the session itself is of importance. And then we follow through with more data from regarding the application, and ultimately what we are protecting obviously is the data. It's the data we want to protect from malicious actors. And then once we have collected all this context and data, we need to have systems that can visualize and look at the data, because now we will have a massive amount of data that we wasn't used to before. And then we add automation and orchestration on top of this. Because remember, each individual request must pass through the intelligent access decision component. So we are doing decisions on allowing access or not at an enormous scale. So we need to have this automated and orchestrated in an efficient fashion, obviously. And it's not until all these are true that we make the decision to actually allow this particular request to pass through to the target application. But what makes it a little complicated is the fact that there is no such thing as a zero trust product. Vendors such as VMware, which I represent, we have products with zero trust capabilities, functions, features that will help you establish a zero trust architecture. But you will never find a single product that once you purchase and implement, you have zero trust enabled everything, because there are so many different things that you need to take into consideration. And just to give you an idea, and obviously I know my company's products the most, so just to paint the picture of how this looks like in the world of VMware, where we have products that fit different pillars. So you will use a smorgasbord of different products in order to establish context in each one of these pillars. So that is the data collection, getting the context before we can make an access decision. Then when I look at the zero trust market, industry-wide, we have a lot of terminology regarding zero trust. I did in the beginning mention that we do have a defined architecture. The problem is no one can achieve it today. Technically, the industry is not yet there, but we have an architecture where we know the requirements of the architecture. But that doesn't stop us from starting. So zero trust today is very much getting started on the zero trust journey, which has been identified by the presidential order regarding zero trust as well. They say you need to start on your zero trust journey. This is the goal, but we know you cannot achieve it today. So start building. So that got me thinking. So perhaps to help myself understand it or visualize it, I started to define 3 generations of zero trust. And the very first generation of zero trust is what many refer to as zero trust network access. And I'm sure you have seen this terminology being used. So what are the characteristics? Zero trust network access is very much based on the capabilities of current products, where the industry is today. It allows for a super strong user validation. We can take much more context into the access decision. We can take device posture, reputation of an IP address, user behavior. The problem is we are granting access for the initial access request, and then we hand it over. We have no more control of that access decision. It's more of we do it once per day. So the second generation, and this second and third generation terminology I made up myself. So don't think these are any kind of industry agreed definitions. It was mostly for my own sake to keep track of different capabilities and where the industry are. So I refer to the second generation of zero trust as zero trust application access. And this is where we start to get the first true zero trust capabilities into place. This is where we introduce continuous enforcement. So you remember the first generation, we have a strong validation, but it's for the initial access request. In the second generation, zero trust application access, we do this on a continuous fashion. And then the third generation, this is much further into the future, but now we start to have a bi-directional communication between the target application and the zero trust system. So we can inform each other. Another way of looking at the same thing, I created this to map different technologies into the different generations of zero trust. So CTNA is very much something that we can achieve today. Zero trust application access is where the industry is moving. Last year, we started to see vendors announcing and releasing continuous enforcement capabilities. So we are capable as an industry to deliver zero trust application access solutions. But the zero trust data access, we are not there yet as an industry. But when you get started on your zero trust journey, you will start implementing the CTNA capabilities and then gradually move into the second generation. And then when the industry is ready, we will be implementing a true zero trust solution. And that is when we have achieved the zero trust data access capabilities. But what is it? Why is it so important with the session and this continuous enforcement? Well, today, when you request access, you do a strong validation, as mentioned, strong authentication. You take in much more context in the access decision, and then you are granted access to a target application and its data. The problem now is this target owns the session, so that it provides separate access tokens, and these have a certain time to live, and they could range from let's say 8 hours to 90 days, a full quarter. And it's not until that time to live of that access token has expired that our central source of truth is invoked again into the flow and can validate the users. So our central, many times the identity provider, is out of the loop. It has absolutely no control over the sessions once we grant that access initially. So in my opinion, the most important thing that we need to focus on once we have built much more context and data awareness is to actually allow for us to do this continuous. So that requires us to take control over the session. Remember this intelligent access decision component I mentioned earlier. I envision this component to be, from an architectural point of view, divided into two main components. One being the policy decision point, where you define your policies, and this is where you feed all your context continuously, a feed of data. And then we need many different kind of enforcement points, because we need to support continuous enforcement universally, not only for a certain modern application type. We need to do this for traditional applications as well. Therefore, we need many different kinds of enforcement points. One being a local enforcement point, which has certain benefits. It's much more universal in the sense it can actually control sessions for any kind of application. The problem is it requires a local component. So might not be the best solution for a BYOD scenario. Secondly, we have the network central enforcement point, many times in the format of a proxy. So now the traffic flows through this component. The benefit is you don't need any local component for enforcement. Problem is it doesn't support all protocols. And then lastly, and this is getting much closer to that last step in the zero trust journey. Now the backend target application is actually zero trust aware. So the application itself can enforce policies, which is obviously a much more lightweight implementation from a customer's point of view. But the downside is it requires recoding of the application. So I envision this being implemented for modern SaaS-based applications. And today there isn't a standard, but there is a draft for a standard, which is from OpenID, the Shared Signals and Event Standardization Group. So the draft is out. There are vendors following the draft. So it is possible today to get started on this, though it's not fully implemented. But we are making great headway as an industry here. So hopefully that describes what I meant with this intelligent access decision component. So that is what we need, and that is what we are as an industry starting to build. Different vendors have different functionalities. At VMware, we strongly believe we need to have many different enforcement points because we want to have a universal zero trust support, not only targeting a handful of the applications. We think all applications need to have at least zero trust enhancements added to them in order to boost their security. So with this, how do you get started then? Well, when you look at the zero trust implementation, I view it as first, obviously, we have work of internal evangelism. We need to build an interest internally for zero trust and an understanding. And then we need to educate the whole organization in zero trust. I'm often asked which teams are involved in zero trust. And my answer is the whole company is involved in zero trust. It's a completely new security architecture and mindset. So everyone needs to be on board and understand it and be educated at certain levels, obviously. But still, this is something that involves everyone. And once you have moved through that, it becomes intrinsic. It's in everything you do. It's in your security DNA as a company. So this is a journey. It will take many years to fully establish this, obviously. But where should you get started? Well, look at the user validation. You must get rid of username and password. You must have a strong user authentication. Secondly, get started now. Get started, but not with your crown jewel. Start with some easy and less critical applications, because you need to build your experience and knowledge around Zero Trust. And then you iterate on your implementation. And just to give you a little idea of how VMware went through this, we are in the middle of our own internal Zero Trust journey. But we started many, many years ago with microsegmenting the data centers. In other words, implementing these microsegmentations around each individual application. And then we centralized the user authentication and authorization, which provided a strong passwordless user authentication. We have moved away from joining any machines into Active Directory, because that will spread your trust zone too wide. All machines that are joined to the domain has implicit trust, and we cannot afford that in a Zero Trust environment. And then we externalize all applications, because it doesn't matter where you are located in order to get access or not to the applications. And we decided that if we cannot manage your device, well, we need to have an isolation and a containerization of that application. So we're using published VDI, virtual desktop, or published applications to achieve that isolation between the backend and the client if we cannot manage the client. If we manage the client, we're happy to allow you access no matter where you are. And lastly, since it doesn't matter where you are located network-wise, all office buildings will provide internet access, and that's it. No more internal LAN routing. Everyone is on internet. So this provided a better user experience and a boost in security, but also it drove down costs and the complexity for maintaining our security. So to wrap this session up, the perimeter-based model is broken. I think and hope we all can agree on that. Zero Trust is not a product, it's an architectural mindset. We must start to take control over the session and start to implement continuous enforcement capabilities. We must implement a strong user validation and start small and learn by doing. Thank you very much for listening to this session.
Thanks for that, Peter. And with that, it's a wrap on day one of the Dynamic CISO Summit 2022. As you know, as I keep saying, I'm incredibly excited when I say this. This is our biggest CISO summit, and I'm grateful for the huge amount of support that we have received from all our partners. Now, Dynamic CISO 2022 is presented by Trend Micro, co-presented by Dell Technologies. Our platinum partners are Palo Alto Networks and Google Cloud. Our community and knowledge partners are ISE Square, the Colombo Sri Lanka chapter, and we are incredibly proud to be associated with our gold partners, Cloudflare, Cohesity, Color Tokens, CrowdStrike, Darktrace, F5, LastPass, Microsoft, NetScout, and Safe Security. Well, tomorrow, it's a bigger day. We're starting at 10 with some excellent voices from the industry and the government, and tomorrow evening by 5 p.m., we'll have our Dynamic CISO Awards. So don't miss that. And through the whole summit and later as well, you can join in on all the conversation on hashtag CISO Summit 2022. We've had a bunch of winners today, and congratulations to all of them. Your goodies should be coming along shortly. On that note, it's time for me to sign off, and we'll catch you tomorrow at 10 a.m. India time Till then, take care and stay safe.